Call to order the Wetlands and Creeks Committee of March 15th, 2022. And for our audience, I want to say hello and thank you for viewing our meeting. The Arcata Wetlands and Creeks Committee. We're being teleconferenced in response to our local efforts to reduce the spread of COVID-19 virus. So we again want to thank the community for their efforts to slow the spread of COVID-19 in Arcata. As we begin to reopen, it'll be important for us to be attentive and committed to masking in public places. I guess that's not necessarily required anymore, but practicing our new social distance skill and maintaining a high disinfection practice. So any votes that we take tonight will be roll call votes this evening. And if you wish to make public comments during the public comment period, or for an individual agenda item during the meeting, there's two ways. One is that during the public comment portion of any item, click on your raise your hand on the right-hand side of your screen. When it's time for public comment on the item and you wish to speak on, the clerk will unmute you and you'll have 3 minutes to comment. The second is to access the meeting by phone, calling the number on the agenda and pressing *9 on your phone, which will mute and unmute you. And any members of the public who need accommodation should email the city clerk at bdory@cityofarcata.org or calling 822-5953. Okay, so having said that, let me call the meeting to, or we already kind of called the meeting to order, and we'll move on to, well, Emily, if you would give us a roll call vote of those in attendance.
Sure. Brown?
Here.
Heaney is absent. McCullough is absent. Metz?
Here.
Murphy?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
Stella?
Here.
Okay. We have a quorum. We'll move on to the minutes of approval for January 18th, 2022. That meeting I missed. My apologies. Any comments on this or motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Do I hear a second?
A second.
Okay, that was first by Jack and second by Vanessa. We have a roll. Any further discussion? Any discussion from the attendees? Hearing none, a roll call vote. Emily?
Brown?
Abstain.
Metz?
Yes.
Murphy?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Stella?
Yes.
Motion passes. We have minutes. Item 3 is oral communication. This time period provides for people to address the committee on matters not on the agenda. At the conclusion, the committee may respond to statements. Any request that requires committee action will be set by the committee for future agenda or referred to staff. Do we have any public communication submitted for tonight's meeting? And remember, raise your hand on the right side of your screen or press *9 on your phone to raise your hand. And we do have one public comment.
You do, Scott. I'm going to promote you to a panelist so that you may speak.
Welcome, Scott. Are you looking for that?
Yep, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Brown, and thank you, committee members. Yeah, my name is Scott McBain. I'm an owner of a small business in Arcata that does restoration work just down the street from City Hall along Jolly Giant Creek. And as some of you may know, we developed the old Isaacson lot just one block south of the co-op building back in 2004, I think it was. Part of the reason that we bought that to develop our office building around it was because Jolly Giant Creek flowed underneath it in a concrete culvert. And as part of our project, we daylighted the creek. And so stream restoration is kind of the main thing that we do as our company. So we're very interested in improving Jolly Giant Creek to the city, and we hope that our actions there, just with our contribution to the community of Jolly Giant Creek, is something that we can expand upon. And in the past, we've worked a lot with Mark Andre to try to facilitate that beyond just our property, but elsewhere. I was pretty disappointed in that we didn't really get an opportunity to explore creek daylighting as part of the Isaacson Sorrel building when that happened. And so I guess I'd like to make some recommendations to the creek committee to potentially not lose those kinds of opportunities in the future. I'm not necessarily trying to jump ahead to the another agenda item here, but as part of the Gateway plan, provides us with a unique opportunity to kind of think big as far as developing kind of a creek restoration plan for particularly Jolly Giant Creek through the downtown area, beyond just the Gateway area, but for the entire city. So I was hoping to maybe put this on the radar of potentially kind of developing a bigger picture restoration plan for Jolly Giant Creek that would include not just setbacks, which I think you guys have worked on in the past, but also looking for opportunities for additional daylighting. And even if those opportunities aren't manifested like right now because of constraints of ownership or other things, again, with the Gateway plan, it's an opportunity to think big and outside the box. So this is kind of our opportunity to do so. So I'm hoping that maybe we can have some more discussions about this. And I would love to help contribute to that solution, given the kind of mission statement of what we do. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Scott. I would love to respond back to you about that. So, but yeah, we could put this on a future agenda item. So I guess at the conclusion of all oral communications, we can bond the statements. So, all right. Are there any other oral communications for the committee tonight? If you would raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Maybe any committee comments on what Scott shared?
Sure. I just wanted to thank Scott for those comments. I'm super interested in opportunities for daylighting of Jolly Giant Creek. And so I'm really interested in any kind of input on that subject anyone can give.
Well, is there any history of the city of Arcata or the Wetlands and Creek Committee having looked comprehensively at Jolly Giant Creek, or has it been kind of patchwork as opportunities arise on individual, like the high school?
I mean, I personally have looked at some of the areas and some of the segments. I'm trying to guess where the existing culvert is. It looks like nothing along Bait Street, where the culvert carries a lot of Jolly Creek, but yeah, we haven't really looked at that. Or even the question I had would be the lengths of culverts, how dark it is, and whether that sort of fish migration in Washington needs lengths in culverts, which intrigues me. But
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to the comprehensive planning piece. Wes, I think to answer your question is just a little bit of both. So we had a citywide fish passage assessment completed, which would have included Jolly Giant Creek. So that took a comprehensive look at fish passage criteria for the creek. I think that our drainage master plan also speaks to an extent some opportunities for Jolly Giant Creek. So those are some off the top of mind planning documents. But then we do also look at more, case by case as opportunities arise or as project ideas come up, restoration opportunities for Jolly Giant Creek as well.
And I'd also like to add, I believe Emily and Bob, we put forward some concepts about utilization of Measure A funds. And Jolly Giant Creek, I believe, was one of the higher priority areas that we felt there was a need for some daylighting. And I believe that's going back last summer. You have to go back into the meeting minutes, but it's important to note that it's on our radar, and that maybe that was formed, there may be opportunity there to continue to bring that to the forefront and how that tries to potential. I think.
Okay, so I hear that opportunity. I guess at some point, maybe it might be worth rolling these together. And as our committee, having a subcommittee, at least have a map of where we think Jolly Giant Creek is, and the other creeks for that matter, which I think we do at some level from the fish. It must be in the fish passage and the drainage, I would assume. And then kind of flag opportunities and maybe prioritize them as, I don't know, it seems like we could do a little more comprehensive long-term planning for opportunities that might arise. I mean, I know it's kind of happening and I see it in different forms, but it would be kind of nice to plan a little further out.
yeah, I mean, for instance,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jack.
Well, I was just saying, with changes in committee membership, not all of us are familiar with all the things that the committee has done in the past. So periodically, and maybe particularly now, as the Gateway plan is really a cool opportunity for addressing Jolly Giant Creek within this infill plan, that we could, as a committee, spend some time down the road just reviewing all the stuff that the city and the committee has done before on Jolly Giant Creek. So we're all on the same page. We all have a common understanding of Jolly Giant Creek, where it is, and what has been published? What work has been done on it in the past?
I think that's a great idea.
And we used to review more project proposals, typically pre-application. And at that point, we often gave input on looking into things like daylighting creeks. We haven't really done much of that in recent years. So I don't believe we looked at the Isaacson project as a committee.
And that didn't really go through a discretionary review that would brought it to our committee. But there is, I mean, the city has a current proposal out to redesign 8th and 9th Street, and that's where Jolly Giant Creek either runs along or crosses. And I don't know, I mean, it was mainly for more of a complete street design, but there is opportunity there. And has that project gone too far? Is the funding not included that aspect of it? So along with stormwater, and that's outside the gateway area. So
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is, given that it wasn't within our discretional purview to review it, I guess that's why I'm like kind of curious about reviewing the existing stuff and then at least having that summary document to date. Here's a map, here's where they are, here's where some opportunities are, and here's what we know about these things. That way, not only just us, but whoever else in the city has that in front of them, and it kind of has to be looked at in a way to protect the creek. If it's not, I mean, if it's not this committee, I don't know where else is it going to happen, you know?
okay. So a future agenda item, maybe our next meeting, to talk about daylighting of creeks in general, inside and outside the gateway project.
We want to do that as kind of I'm just asking, I'm trying to be a little more proactive here. So would we have a subcommittee gather stuff and start working a little bit on it so that we have something to go with? So we have, or are we going to try to make it as a work item in a meeting or a present? You know, I don't like coming to a meeting and then just kind of talking about it and everything. It'd be nice to have kind of a subcommittee so it's lined out. Like Emily always comes pretty much prepared, and she has stuff like, we're going to talk about this, this, and this. And this is the kind of the framework we're within. And I know we all have limited time. So I'm kind of wondering if we could pull something together to at least have something to start with. And then if we need to make a different plan, that's fine. But I guess I'm just trying to push it along a little here.
I mean, we do have a map, a figure in our gateway plan, draft figure that starts to show the daylighted sections of Jolly Giant Creek. That would be a good start.
Yeah, I see that.
And then finding the connections.
So I think if I can offer some staff input, I would say that as a starting point, we can pull together a list of previous restoration efforts that have happened on Jolly Giant Creek, as well as a map of the Jolly Giant Creek watershed that can include infrastructure, i.e. culverts. We do have all of that mapped, so it's pretty easy to turn around. We can present a staff report corresponding to that map and potential project list. So include the map in the list with the agenda packet ahead of time, provide a staff report. Perhaps at that meeting, the Wetlands and Creeks Committee could consider formation of a subcommittee. I'm not sure if subcommittee formation has to be agendized pursuant to the Brown Act. I think that might be good to play safe on just in case. We can try to have that pulled together by May, though it might end up being that it's the meeting subsequent, so the next July meeting, just given all the priorities that we're currently juggling right now on the staff level, especially in the next couple of months. But I think that would help to move this forward in a more tangible way. Certainly open to discussion, but that's my 2 cents.
No, I think that's good. And Scott, we appreciate your comments on this. It's something we have talked about in the past, and this is kind of like an impetus to move it along maybe to the next step.
I have a lot of trust in Emily's ability to educate us on Jolly Giant Creek.
So, all right, well, let's put that on another agenda item, and we have a pretty full agenda tonight. So I want to get to those items. Is there any other discussion before we move on? Okay, seeing none, then agenda modifications. Do we have any agenda modifications? Jeremy mentioned abstaining from the Gateway project, and I would just maybe ask David if he had any preference on which item we covered first, the Gateway. I think we have people from the audience more interested in the Gateway than in the sea level rise.
Yeah, that is probably true, but I don't have a preference either way. I'm happy to start wherever the committee wants to start.
Well, Jeremy didn't mind turning off his video and microphone while we did the Gateway. Anybody else have preferences, or we just stick with the regular agenda?
I mean, can I ask a quick question relative to the conflict? I get GHD's working on the CEQA. Is it it's in process, I assume, I take it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and so there's not going to be anything that's not already in the draft plan discussed, right? I'm actually not seeing the conflict right now for some reason. Maybe somebody could just explain it to me.
Well, I mean, in general, I'm not prepared to, and probably not qualified to, when it boils down to it, to really evaluate Jeremy's potential conflict of interest. But you know, it doesn't hurt to recuse out of an abundance of caution. But it would be tied to things. You know, there's a couple of different ways to be conflicted. And I think the thing that could be of interest here, whether or not there's an actual, in fact, financial conflict of interest, is potential perception of conflict of interest, which, you know, that's really up to Jeremy to decide one way or the other anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I will say that if there's...
Go ahead, David. Yeah, so Wes, just back to your question, it's more just a perceived conflict. I personally have not been directly involved with the CEQA document, but the firm I work for, obviously GHD, has been. And so when in doubt, our motto is to sit it out. So that's what we're going to do. That's what I'm doing here. And I think that's in the best interest of the city and for the community and myself.
Okay, so Jeremy abstaining. Let's move on to new business. Receive an update on the Gateway plan and take action as appropriate.
All right. Good evening, all. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to get out and talk with all of the different committees about the Gateway Area Plan and the subject matter that's most relevant to the committees. We've been sort of focusing on that, but I've also like to give a general overview of the document, just so that you have kind of a you know, context for where that subject matter that's of particular interest to you fits within the document. So I'll start with that, but before I get started, I did want to note that as you were discussing the concept of daylighting, I just, for kicks and giggles, looked through the document, and this document actually started out, the very core of it was a plan to increase housing stock in the city of Arcata. And it, in fact, started out as the housing specific plan. It was the first iteration, sort of, you know, version 1.0, if you will. And so central to this plan is affordable housing. And I just checked the terms daylighting and affordable housing and compared those. And for some reason, even though this is supposed to be an affordable housing or a housing plan and an economic development plan, daylighting is mentioned 21 times and affordable housing is only mentioned 11 times. So I think we did a really good job. I guess I'll start with by saying really trying to address all the you know, potential for you know, opportunities within this gateway area to try and enhance the you know, the environment, try and enhance the the public sphere, trying to enhance the process and the potential for providing what this community needs now and what it will need into the future. So I'm happy to share this with you today. Just share my screen, walk you through the document. So this draft was released in December of last year. I don't believe that we've been back to your committee since the release of the draft. We did come early in its development to try and find out from your committee what some of the community amenities we should be focusing in on, and we can talk back through those if you'd like. But really, this is a first opportunity that you've had as a committee to see this in its full form. So just again, orienting real quick, the first section is the people summary, similar to an executive summary where, the really important executive gets a slimmed down version of Cliff Notes version of the document. In this case, the important person, that executive, are the people. And so we've provided a people summary. If you don't have time to read the entire document, you can really get a sense for what the document is attempting to do by reading this people summary. We go through, and I'm not going to walk through the entire document here, but I do want to stop at a couple of key places. The first is to just look at the area that we're talking about here. So here's Samoa Boulevard, and the yellow line outlines the Gateway Area Plan. It picks up some of the commercial properties along Samoa, and then it zigzags in, basically picking up opportunity sites. Here's Arcata Trailer Court before it hits K Street. K Street runs down, we pick up K Hills, the old K Hills there as an opportunity site, and then along Alliance, and then back down O and Q. So here's the area here. In the plan, it's cited as 138 acres. I recently had a public member tell me that he had calculated the acreage, and I don't know how he did it, but he got a different number. So we're still trying to resolve on that. It's somewhere between 128 and 138 acres, so quite a bit of area. And one of the striking things as you look at the aerial is that there's a lot of open space within this 128, 138 acres. There's still quite a bit of built environment, but there's a lot of vacant parcels as well. Notably, to this committee, there's Jolly Giant Creek that does run through. Here's the little strip that Scott was talking about. I believe that's where I'm sorry, they're just outside. Right here, little strip that Scott was talking about that have been restored, but you can see it pops up here and there. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But this is the area. The other thing I wanted to point out is that the blue line with the little heartbeat there, and then the jag there, this is the coastal zone boundary. Areas south of this are in the coastal zone, areas north of it are outside the coastal zone, shown in this extent right here. So that's an important piece too. We're also talking about the local coastal program today, and we'll dig into that in the next item. But the connection between these documents is important to understand, in particular when it comes to sea level rise, our adaptation strategy, which is in part counting on infill densification in areas that won't be threatened in the next 100 years to sea level rise, so we can address our not our growth and development needs, but also a strategy for relocating uses that are currently in areas that we want to enter. So I just want to ask you a couple of key pieces. Any questions about the orientation of the map or what we're looking at here, where the area is? Okay, cool. The other thing I'll mention is that this whole area right here is currently zoned, with the exception of some commercial here. Industrial general has industrial uses like almost smack dab in the middle of our residential zoning districts here. And so there's a kind of a legacy land use here. Much of this area has started to convert anyway, due in large part to what's going on in the Creamery District and the sort of mix of uses that were called for in that area that the city embraced. And so we're taking what's going on in the Creamery District and sort of supersizing it, if you will. The next thing I'll orient to is the challenges and opportunities. I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but they do identify the various elements that we're trying to address through the plan. And one that will be of relevance to this committee, obviously, is climate change and sustainability. I believe this is one of the areas where we need to mention regulating, but certainly protecting the green belts around the city of Arcata and not putting development pressure onto those green belts is an important piece to that. Okay, I'll jump real quick to land use here, just to sort of orient you to the different land uses within the district. For development land uses and one that's called natural resource. Natural resources mirrors the existing natural resource land use that we have in the existing zoning ordinance. And the one area that's identified as natural resources is sort of the old log pond on the Schmidt-Bauer property. The other areas are identified for various types, designs, and scale of development. The thing I want to note about this, though, we can see here that there's a little bit of the wetland that's on this property that is not included in the natural resources zoning district. These can be finessed a little bit around some of those features, but for the most part, the idea here is that we've got the Barrel District, which has greatest opportunity, huge number of landowners, largest number of vacant parcels, and some real opportunity for wetland enhancement on the site and restoration. We got the Hub, which has second highest development potential, really focusing on infill development. I'm sorry, there's a natural resource section right here as well. Maybe should incorporate this as well. It's fine to have creek zones in other zoning districts. That's not a problem. So they don't have to mirror one, but just out there. And then we have a commercial zone that's really designed around the corridor around K Street. So you'd have different design elements for each of those different districts based on what they provide within those areas. The Brown zoning district is basically a transition with lower scale development to just outside that area. I'm mostly going to show this land use map to you to identify and orient real quick that we do recognize that there are some areas that we want to retain for natural resources. So what does that look like? I'm going to jump right over to open space and conservation, which is one of the areas where I think will be of interest to this committee. And I'll just orient you to the overall structure of each of these elements. So basically, open space and conservation, it's chapter number 6. Each of the chapters starts with an overview. You can tell, based on the graphics we use, that the creeks are an important feature, Jolly Giant in particular, in this element of this section. I'll line on a 2-page view anymore. But we did identify in here the existing creeks. Again, you can see where they daylight, where they go under, as well as some opportunities for restoration. Living parts of daylighted creek, again, is one of the types, if you will, of open space categories. And the idea here is that we've got a lot of railroad track that runs right alongside portions of Jolly Giant Creek. We have some properties like the car wash, which is a huge opportunity for a private development that could daylight more creek, as Scott did with his project. There's also some opportunity in that same area for additional daylighting or exposing of creeks that are already daylighted that are underneath buildings through the development standards. And so we're exploring all of those. We could talk in more detail about that if you want. But we did do an analysis, and if you want to get into this in more detail at your future meeting, when you're talking about setting up a subcommittee to look specifically at daylighting, we can bring back some of the work that we've already done around proposals in this gateway area for where we think opportunity for daylighting is and where it would just probably be cost prohibitive. So this is an important piece to that. Check the full screen view. And then the conceptual open plan map essentially takes that same area. I'll focus not necessarily on the active recreational areas, but we can talk about those if you're interested, and more on sort of the creek and opportunities for trails and that sort of thing, where we have the opportunity to do restoration. There's already a proposed restoration for this area right here, and areas that we can codify as new natural resource spaces, some of which I've talked about already. And then this section gets into the specific policies. So this is an element, the gateway area plan is an element of the general plan. All of this leads to the policy document, the policy level statements that we will then in another implementation document implement through various programs. But I did want to point to in particular GA6G, which is restoration enhancement of creek, encourage daylighting creek segments, development projects, and we got a couple of those key areas identified. We also have policies around wetland areas, maintain an OS standard, allow for passive recreational uses. So on Schmidt-Bauer property, for example, if we could create new trails through there, maybe we could transition that over time from basically a homeless encampment to something that's a community amenity for for folks to walk on and enjoy the wildlife and whatnot. The other item that pertains to daylighting creeks, just pointed that came up earlier, GA6A, linear park daylighted creek. This is what I was referring to earlier in segments of the railroad. And then, the amenities that go along with this, part of the way that this plan will work is that we'll have a community design process where the community can come together and say, these are the kinds of designs and buildings we'd like to see. And we'll have a form-based code built out of that. And then there will also be community amenities that are akin to the kinds of conditions of approval that you might get on a one-off project by project basis, but with a little bit more master planning included in it. And then they will come, the developers will come and say, okay, well, I've complied with your form-based code, and here are the amenities that I can give you on this project. Daylighting creeks is one of those amenities. And then I think the last piece that I just wanted to want you to before we open up the conversation is under the mobility section, where you can start to see the relationship between the active and passive recreational amenities and the creek segments that are. And so these green dotted lines are new trails proposed. For the most part, they follow along corridors. And so those projects fall in combination with restoration. I don't know how many have read the document, so I'm happy to address those. Or if you have general comments or musings, then we're more than happy to take some comment. At this point, just have a conversation around ways to improve this document, and to and then we've made some suggestions on how we do that. So it's really up to your committee whether you want to formally take action, or whether you want to make some suggestions, and we'll see how we can bring this to the council before pulling together a penultimate final document, draft document rather. So that's all I have on that. Be happy to hear questions.
And I'll note that our agenda item does allow us to take a formal action if we wanted to, but we can, and in your packets, there is that page of open space and conservation policies if you wanted to review that. I want to mention the first page we got was a summary of our meeting in July. And it starts out talking about the Parks and Rec Committee, and I think that should be the Wetlands and Creeks Committee. Just wanted to point that out.
I'll jump in. I caught that just before this meeting, but I think that the date was correct, or the month was correct, but I think the committee reference was incorrect. Sorry, David, to jump in, but I just also caught that.
Oh, that's okay. There's a huge volume of paperwork being moved around on this item for sure, and we certainly actually had that experience with one other committee where I think it was somehow mislabeled and wound up bringing the Economic Development Committee's recommendations to the Parks and Rec Committee. So now we're just traveling that downhill, I guess. Now you got the Park and Rec Committee recommendations potentially. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
I believe the recommendations are correct. And
Yeah.
Bob or others, if it doesn't look right, please let us know.
Oh, just labeled wrong. Okay, great.
Correct.
Can I just ask David and Emily, it's a process question. So at some point, do you guys want this committee to approve or not approve something, to take a vote on something and say yes or no?
It's really the committee's discretion to, how they want to form their recommendation.
But that somebody does want us to make a recommendation or not.
It would be great if you made a recommendation. It's to your discretion. The couple of committees that we've gone to date have said we're happy to give you some suggestions, and there was general consensus, kind of straw poll voting going on, but there wasn't a formal yes, approve this plan this way. What I understand the Park and Rec Committee's reasoning to be is that this is still in draft form. Maybe bring it back one more time once you've gotten direction from the council on what the final document is going to look like. I cannot guarantee what that process is going to look like. We've already gone to most of these committees at least 2 times, and some of them 3. And so it's really to the discretion of the council whether they want to send it back through another round of committee review. What we've been doing with the committees that we've gone to thus far is kind of heard suggestions, said, yeah, I think we can make those recommendations. For example, the Parks and Rec Committee felt like there wasn't a heavy enough emphasis on active recreation in one of the policies. So we said, well, we'll update that. We'll increase the emphasis on, improve the emphasis on active recreation. And so that was kind of we left without like a formal vote, but with some suggestions on how to improve it. So it's really up to you how you want to handle that.
So maybe along those lines, and if we made some comments, that's as far as we went, what will you do with those comments? Be not codified, but recorded and added to all the other comments you get on the draft gateway plan, and if we make a
Yeah.
formal action, does it, something else different happen, or it's just noted as a formal action?
No, that's a great question too. What I'm going to say is it depends. For example, the Parks and Recs recommendation to enhance active recreation didn't have a counterbalance in policy. It was simply a suggestion on how to improve and emphasize what we believed was already in there. If you said, for example, we recommend that every single foot of Jolly Giant Creek be daylighted. Well, I would bring that to the council, and I would say the Creeks and Wetlands Committee said they think that the entirety of Jolly Giant Creek should be daylighted. I'm going to recommend against that. And so, similarly, if you made a formal action to that end, I would say this is the action of the Creeks and Wetlands Committee. Staff is recommending that you do not follow that recommendation. And then ultimately, it's going to be and for this reason, this is the policy that you're balancing when you daylight all of the creeks. This is what we would lose from the plan if we did that. So it really depends on the nature of the conversation. What we've been getting thus far at the committee level has really been ways to polish and enhance and highlight, and those kinds of suggestions that don't have a countervailing policy impact on some other area. We've just said right in the meeting, yeah, we can make those changes and make those as a recommendation to the city council. But ultimately, all of the changes that come forward out of all the different engagements that we're doing, will formally be directed by the council at one hearing, hopefully, so that there's not, a lot of back and forth between, well, this committee said this, so now we're going to go back and ask all the committees, what do you think about that? That committee said this, now we're going to go back through all the committees, and you know what I mean?
Yes. One other question. So
a one-time process.
Go ahead. So the environmental documents being prepared, is that going to be prepared on the draft gateway plan as it is December 2021, or will some changes be made to the gateway plan before it goes through the CEQA process?
That's a really great question. We are looking to have a stable project description for the environmental document. The environmental document is evaluating the gateway area plan, but it's also evaluating the general plan updates that we'll be doing, as well as the coastal zoning, as well as the zoning ordinance associated, the form-based zone code zoning ordinance associated with the gateway area plan. And so we would like to have a direction from the council with the changes that have been proposed, so that we're evaluating that. But at the end of the day, if the plan doesn't change significantly, we haven't heard substantial changes, and let's say we evaluate the project description as it stands right now, any step down from that would be adequately reviewed and evaluated through that environmental document, and any increase in that would have to be evaluated again. So we're trying to, recognizing that there are a lot of pieces in motion right now, work efficiently to have a stable project description, expecting and anticipating that the changes that would be made would have either no environmental impact or a lesser environmental impact than what's being evaluated.
Thank you.
I still have a question about the distinction between active and passive recreation.
Okay. Just what is it? What's the difference?
Yeah, what's the difference?
Emily might be able to give you a better definition. My understanding is that, active recreation is like, game and sport. Passive recreation is things like trails.
Yep, I'd agree with that.
So there's no activity there. It's just an amenity that you can go in and experience. The marsh is a passive recreational opportunity.
So more of like low impact recreation versus group recreation or something?
Another way potentially you could think about it is like I guess I'll use the term infrastructure, so more active recreation would be like a soccer field or a playground or a bocce ball court, infrastructure that's put in place, whereas passive recreation would be like the trails in the community forest, the trails at the marsh. So I would say less group versus individual and more infrastructure related.
I get your confusion though, because when I'm using the trails, I feel pretty darn active.
Exactly. Also, I had some questions about GA6F about wetland areas, allowing for passive recreational uses within wetlands. How does that compare with the city's existing regulations for allowable uses in wetlands? It's been a while since I read that, so do we currently allow for passive and or active recreational uses in wetlands?
I think what this is trying to get at is the idea that you can have trails, you know, around wetlands, not necessarily that you would have. I think it's a wetland areas, not wetlands, if you will. And so I think we can clarify that language. If you look at the you know, where the policies sort of are further refined in terms of the you know, the mapping and that sort of thing, you'll see that we have trails around some of those features that we've identified. So we can certainly clarify that.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering because it did say within and around wetland areas. So I was trying to get an idea of what kind of recreation was going to be allowed within wetlands.
I had another question about that same item. Comment, I guess. If you read on, there's a phrase there to enhance and restore wetland functions where feasible. And I wonder how you define feasibility. If a developer says, it's not feasible for us to do anything here, can they pave paradise and put up a parking lot, or what? I'm a little bit concerned about that phrase.
Well, this is I guess what I would say is, you know, this is the, you know, feasible has a legal definition, but I think what we're trying to say here is that, you know, there are going to be some real opportunity areas for enhancement and restoration, and they're going to have an impact, a larger impact. It doesn't impact the ability, the city's no net loss, policies or anything like that. It doesn't, replace that. But the concept here is that we want to, support restoration, especially of, these larger complexes, and to ensure that, again, they consolidate scattered low quality wetlands into a higher quality wetland complexes, like it says in that final sentence there. So really just embracing the idea that, that we can do better. There are existing wetlands out there, but we can do better. And working with the private landowner, not just to not touch their wetland, but to actually, go a step further and enhance and restore them. There's also opportunities, I'd pointed to, let me zoom back out. Let's see. In this area, for example, in the Barrel District, sorry, this is a pretty well-established, high-quality wetland already. It's only degraded by the fact that people are living in it. But there are also, kind of scattered pocket wetlands throughout here that, do two things. Number one, they don't have, a lot of, they don't contribute a high degree of habitat value in their current state, but then they also, impact the ability of the city to use that land for other purposes. If you were to say, well, we're just not going to pay, we're not going to, as you said, pave paradise anywhere. We're not going to allow any wetland fill. So instead, if you embrace the idea that, there may be these low quality wetlands, and if you can, enhance other wetlands and contribute to, larger complexes elsewhere in the city, that program would ultimately get us a bigger bang for the buck in terms of habitat qualities and the types of wetlands that we'll have in the absence of that policy.
So does,
I guess the idea here at the end of the day is to have a master plan for these wetlands as opposed to just letting project by project one off mitigate just sort of over on the corner of their property over there.
so does consolidating scattered wetlands mean filling some wetlands and creating some elsewhere? Is that what consolidation means?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There are going to be areas where, I mean, we've all seen it. You've reviewed, I don't know if, how, I don't know that you've reviewed them in this capacity, but you've always seen wetland delineations in the area, and maybe there's, very small, wetland that's in an area that is, going to be developed. It's been a long time since I've been involved and engaged in wetland delineations, but, one of the things that used to trouble me was that I would be delineating something that was literally 100% Himalayan blackberry, a non-native and invasive species that types out as fact wet species, and you have to call it a wetland. And it just drove me nuts that this is, something that is, that we're protecting. And also, when you have certain policies that, wouldn't allow you to, to impact that wetland, you've lost an opportunity to, transform that into something that's, has more native species and maybe more contiguous with, larger wetland that provides more habitat value. So this policy kind of recognizes the ability to, take advantage of those opportunities where they exist.
So can I ask a question about, so table 8, figure 7, and of course I'm just looking this over, but it seems like from a Wetlands and Creeks Committee point of view, besides having the creek overlaid on this, where it's daylighted, or at least Jolly Giant, the figure itself, you go down the figure just for a sec, just the next page. It seems like that's the punchline right there, where these, just as you're kind of describing down, and I guess that's called the barrel district within that kind of maroonish polygon. It seems to me that this is the definition of like where the open space, as far as natural open space, will be. These linear corridors you have, and then I think it's called passive open space on the left there, that funny polygon. So this is kind of the punchline, right? This is the where the creek will be, and where I guess some kind of open, I don't know what that passive open space, what it will actually be like, but is that true? This is kind of the punchline here, where the rest will be, I have to look at the densities and to know what kind of, how much, what's going into, proposed to go into these areas, like housing and stuff. I know we're trying to increase the amount of housing and various things in the air, also with some community space, but I mean, is this kind of the punchline?
I'm not real sure how to answer that question.
Because it did,
I guess I'm not.
When I guess when I get through, when I of course I haven't read this thing in its entirety, but like I scanned just like you did daylighting. I only found 13 in there mentions of it, and Jolly Giant Creek was 12. And I looked through each one of them, and then I came to this, and I was like, oh wow, here's kind of, to me, and I'll have to look through it more. But this kind of looks like the natural open space that we would be working with in these green polygons when we're done. And I just want to make sure that's true, because that's quite a reduction. And, I mean, not that we hopefully won't plant trees and have some corridors and stuff, but this, it looks like especially if this map is actually faded, the photo, relative to the green one, which is I think the next map or the one before, which makes it stand out quite radically.
Okay, the next map. This one?
Or any of them, yeah. Any of them that are like, highlighted, they're not faded. I get the point of doing that. It's to highlight certain things. Brian's a really good GIS person. I get what he's doing, you know, but the point being is like when you have this more colorful one, I'm like, wow, there's a lot more vegetation. It's also probably taken during a different time of year for that matter. But the point is, maybe this thing's photo, I don't know. Anyway, it seems like quite a reduction in the natural green space.
Is your question, I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm sure it's my, I'm just not reading this well. Is your question, are these the only areas that will have protection?
Protection, or they'll be the only places where we kind of have the natural, you know, or whatever. Nothing's natural around here anymore. There's no redwood trees or whatever. But the point is, this is where basically the creek and wetland space / open space would be, is in these green and off green polygons, correct? The rest will be.
Okay, I'm sorry. It took me so long to get to where what you were asking. No, these are special areas that are identified to ensure that those areas do have, various features. So this green area right here is designated a linear, linear features. Here's the car wash property that's identified there, so we can have a specific measure that would allow for daylighting the creek there. This is identified because we want to ensure that we have, access to the trail for the rail for a trail, and that we can implement the city's restoration project here. We've already done a restoration project here. There's one proposed right here. And so these are identifying what we already know are sort of baked into the plan as large-scale public infrastructure. But the design specifications are going to incorporate a lot of green space and open space within the properties themselves. And I'll just point out, for example, there's a wetland complex right here. I don't know how much of it is actually wetland, but I've gone back and looked at it, and I'm certain that there's some wetland in this area right here. We're not proposing that you can now, just because it's not in one of these designated areas, you can go and obliterate that wetland and build on it. The idea is that there are certainly other constraints that are site specific and or opportunities that are site specific that will be implemented through that more detailed form-based code. And then in addition, I mean, for this one, this is a coastal wetland. It's several at least an acre of coastal wetland. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. It is really poor quality right now. There's a ton of invasives in there. And again, as I mentioned, there are people living in it, doing their business in it. And, it's going to stay like that forever unless we do something that incentivizes investment in it. And so what we're proposing in the plan, I guess, is for, in this image here, this identifies specifically recreational opportunities. And then there are other areas that have policies that aren't necessarily mapped that would be applied, within that zoning code. So I would say this is it. This is just a start.
Okay.
I'll give you a sense too, of some of the. Let's see if I can find this real quick. Some of the inspiration for ideas of what the built environment might look like. These pictures from other plan areas. Are kind of just like this one zooms in on the building. So there are some, large scale buildings, some that show, setbacks and whatnot. Some that show, parks and, or courtyards interspersed. I don't know why these are highlighted the way that they're highlighted. But, here's an example where, there's quite a bit of built environment, but, what the plan aims to do overall is to ensure that there's high quality, high density environment, that we don't lose sort of the values that and the aesthetic and the communal space and recreational space that we all value, and we think it can be done, even though there are larger scale buildings proposed in here. As a matter of fact, as I'd mentioned, the the plan started out as sort of like development. How do we get more housing? How do we get more recreational opportunity? And it has very little to do with housing in the final analysis. There's only one chapter on housing, one chapter on employment, and it focuses on all the other subject matter in much more detail.
David and committee, I wanted to say one more thing about the item GA6F wetlands area. which we were previously discussing. I think that's a fascinating paragraph. And I'm really interested in the idea of no net loss standard. And I think that the committee, I'd love to have a conversation with the committee, just an open, casual conversation with the committee about this paragraph and see how everyone feels about it, maybe at a future meeting. So I just wanted to say that it's a really cool paragraph, worthy of careful consideration, in my opinion. And then the other thing I wanted to say was in figure 7, the conceptual open space plan, the linear park that you've pointed out to us a couple times is really cool. I love it. It's, you know, I'm so glad it's in the plan. It's the biggest part of Jolly Giant Creek in the Gateway Area Plan. And I just wanted to ask you, it maybe such a small minor thing, maybe I shouldn't bring it up, but I want to anyway. In the southern part of the linear park, what is currently just across from the new data center, there's this lot. It used to be just a grass. Yeah. What's the deal with that parcel there, and why was that not included in the linear plan? Yeah, if you go a little bit east of there, yeah. If you go, I see where the linear park is delineated. And at the bottom, there's the child daycare center currently outside. And just north of that is that place that's currently just used by the data center to dump their stuff. Why is that not included in the linear plan, linear park?
That's a great question. That's a private parcel, private individual's parcel. We have tried to find these, we did it on this one. This is a private parcel too, so this is making I don't know. This area, I guess, is, potentially developable. One of the things that, could happen here is, if this landowner is willing to, give up a portion over here, we could maybe expand this a little bit over here and then, drop this out. I think we identified this originally because we thought that we had, easements through here, and we're not exactly sure that we do at this point. And so, so I'm kind of thinking behind that.
Okay.
This one here really too, to try and make sure there's connectivity between, sort of O Street side and M Street.
Okay, that's fine. Just I didn't understand. I never knew if that was public, owned by the city, or private, or what. And I watch its evolution over time, and it's interesting to me. It's an interesting little piece there that could sort of help anchor the bottom of that linear park and make it a better park. Just throwing that out there.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. We'll evaluate that and explore that with the landowner.
As long as around that figure, I guess I'd like to probably supplement our definition of daylighting creeks and want to include bridges to that. And I'm just looking at the area on 10th Street between the car wash and going upstream from there. I mean, it's like, well, that's on private land, but there's a lot of roadway where there's a creek, and where I'm not suggesting that the whole creek be daylighted. I think there are opportunities as you talk about some of the right-of-way improvements. So we're making a lot on passive recreation for biking and pedestrian access, but not really considering the creek as being a creek. And so I think there's opportunities in the right-of-way by a bridge, narrowing down the right-of-way lanes or something, something that like happened on Zedner Avenue many years ago, where that was turned into a one-way street. So so when you talk about daylighting, it always seems like removing the culverts that are on private land. And I just think there's more opportunity in the public right-of-way. And this being a city plan, that there should be some incentive. Now we know bridges are very expensive, but as incentives come from development, that should be also a focus on some of these areas.
Yeah. Well,
we considered this intersects.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, we did consider this. Oh, you go.
Sorry, classic Zoom here. No, I was just going to reiterate that. I was thinking about that earlier too with the bridges. I brought up a photo from another spot. I think that's a great idea, is contemplating, it's like a wildlife corridor bridge, only it's a aquatic corridor bridge in a sense for the creek, especially if it's permeable. Rainwater can enter, or various things. Anyway, just wanted to reiterate that I really like that idea. It's also, the long-term infrastructure, you lose a culvert under one of those streets, it's going to cost more than a bridge.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And, I'm not exactly sure where the culvert goes under here. It pops back out. There's a little bit of daylighted here, and you can look underneath this building and you can see I don't think the creek runs under here, but there's like a backwater. And so the one piece, the reason why we didn't include this as a daylight section, and I agree, it would be great as a bridge, daylighted portion. But we have the plan right now calls for L Street being a one-way couplet with K Street, and so L Street would be turned back into a through road, and it would be a segregated Class 1 trail. And so this is one of those areas where there's quite a plan in this corner, and that would be a policy balancing decision that would have to be made. And one way this can be considered, I guess, is that we have to look at the feasibility of this. You already have a trail that goes across here. We need some cross connection. This portion from 11 to this portion could be gotten to from down here. So theoretically, you could eliminate the L Street crossing for vehicular traffic, and then bridge this portion if we didn't turn L into a one-way couplet. But then you're basically creating a very expensive project for a very small portion of creek. But I think some of that too might depend on where it pops out. I mean, this building, if it was mulched and rebuilt on another, somewhere else on the property, and then this portion of the creek be restored, I think that is an option.
Yeah, if that block were ever redeveloped, I mean, you can see how much it's just junk, open parking lot, and I think that's the Portuguese Hall there or something like that. But if that were ever redeveloped, it's possible that a fairly large portion, almost a block's width of Jolly Giant Creek could be daylighted if the city could work it out with a private landowner.
Yeah, I don't think the alignment of that, but I suppose, I suppose it's
just fronting 11th Street.
Oh, here.
Oh, sorry, not 11th, whatever that's in.
Right here. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, we can explore that too.
We have this on our future as far as just looking at daylight opportunity or where the Jolly Giant Creek alignment actually goes. I mean, at least that map would be available so we'd be able to look at creative solutions in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Anything else while we're looking at it? Imagine you did see that they are numbered repeatedly, maybe numbered.
There's there's a couple of little errors like that we're picking up along the way.
So what's just out of curiosity? So there's a CEQA timeline by the end of the year? Is that what I heard? And then what is the big picture process for approval and moving forward? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question too. We do have right now our timeline established that it would run through the end of this year. We have some funding sources that expire at the end of the year. I think that we've been working with those grant sources to make sure that we're going to be able to comply with the requirements of them. And I think that I'm hoping that they'll be flexible, but the idea right now is that we would run through the end of the year, complete the CEQA process, and have documents that we're ready to adopt either at the end of this year or early next year.
So, sorry, just for clarification, it goes to the city council for adoption then at that point?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So and we'll be coming back to your committee too with the the sections of the general plan update that are again relevant to this body, and there'll be recommendations on that, I'm sure. All of that will be packaged together and evaluated under the EIR. And then, the recommendations from the various committees, the recommendation from the Planning Commission, ultimately the decision by the City Council.
So one other comment I had was regarding street right of ways, and again, there are the cross sections and stuff, but just the opportunity for stormwater, particularly in the, and that was one of our goals at the very beginning. We talked about the stormwater considerations in the Jolly Giant Creek watershed to try and clean that area up. So again, thinking about the, I mean, we talked about complete streets, and I think the term is green streets when you add LID features in the street right of ways. And so again, promoting that. I know the city has a policy about waiving on-site stormwater, and I would hope that the city doesn't do that anymore, but provides for the off-site stormwater features, which you do have in there as the policy, I believe. So.
Yeah. So here, am I muted? You can hear me, right? Yeah, you can hear me. We've got a couple of policies in here that do address that. I think we are also, again, we're subject to the MS4 requirements, above and beyond whatever the policy and the plan says here, and that does require on-site stormwater. I think there's a possibility in subdivisions to create, sort of regional stormwater systems under the MS4 requirements, but otherwise they'll all be on-site. But if you have specific recommendations on policy improvements to ensure that we've captured that, I'd love to hear them.
I think in our July notes, that's when we said offsite. So, especially when the city is interested in maximizing the use of the area for commercial or residential uses. Putting on-site stormwater features will take up a lot of that room. So it'll lower your ability to develop your property. And so the MS4 permit doesn't allow it to have offsite, but I think that if you can promote that more, so to basically do stormwater banking, for instance, so that you provide stormwater, because of existing developments, Jolly Giant Creek is highly impacted for it. And just noticing, the city did a lot of curb return or curb improvements in the Jolly Giant Creek, and there were a lot of storm drains right next to where that occurred, and the city did nothing regarding stormwater there. And so again, it's not a public works thing in their mind. There's no funding for these things. And so it's something that development will need to pay for unless the city gets grant funding. But just thinking about the urbanization of Jolly Giant Creek and doing stormwater improvements as a very important part of the right-of-way development in the Gateway area. And that was, we did mention that in our July.
Okay, I'll go back and read those and try and make sure that we've captured that, because it sounds like maybe it's not captured here.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I get where you're going though, but basically to make sure stormwater improvements in the street storm drain system is considered and incorporated as well.
Yeah, and I think the right of way is a great place to put the stormwater improvements. And again, you're going to lose development potential if you keep them only on site. Like up to a third of your lot area might be first meeting MS4 requirements. So thinking of creative solutions that attain the same thing.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay, any other comments on the policies or the mapping on here? I guess we can also, as Jackie recommended looking at the wetland areas thing at maybe our next meeting, and can more vet that and provide comments on our own. So, okay, hearing no other comments, then we should open this up for public comment. Anybody of our attendees want to raise their hands and have comments on this? Okay, we have a hand raised from Patricia.
Okay, now can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm kind of worried a little bit about the wetlands and the language in both the Gateway Plan and actually in the local coastal program about trading wetlands and restoring wetlands. And there's a lot of language, and especially in the local coastal program about, you know, banking wetlands and combining wetlands. And when I asked at the NOP of the EIR scoping meeting, what the city, or what the mapping of the wetlands were that the city had, if they had detailed maps of the existing wetlands, both pocket and larger wetlands in, I was referring mainly to the Gateway area, but I was curious about wetlands as a whole. I was told that those maps were very, very antiquated and they didn't really have those. Mine, especially when it's sounding like development, any large development project isn't going to be addressing the existing wetlands on the property that they're developing. So that is a concern of mine, that there's eliminating a lot of these smaller wetlands and combine them. Oh, right now I'm on the corner of 7th and L Street, and I don't know if you can hear the frogs, but there's a lot of frogs out my front door. And so I'm a little concerned about this. I believe it to be a stormwater drainage along L Street, and what will happen to this habitat. I know on the upper end of L Street, they lost a lot of their frog habitat with along the data center, and when the bicycle path went in connecting to Alliance Street. So anyways, that's my concern on some of that language. It would be really nice if we had a detailed map and studies of what exactly the size and the area and or the locations of the wetlands in the city as a whole, but especially the Gateway area. So anyways, thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you, Patricia. And maybe just in response, yeah, I think the city would love to have that too, but one is that they're very expensive, a lot of labor intensive use, plus they get outdated after so many years. And so the city's current policies is to require wetland mapping on projects and adjacent to projects. So that would certainly happen during any kind of development proposal in the Gateway project. And I think the current trend, I mean, my experience is, as I think David mentioned, is we've been looking at these pocket wetlands for a long time, and the current trend with resource agencies is the consolidation of some of these features. So based again on value and size. So okay, any other public comment? Cindy Wilcox has her hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Cindy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You have to, obviously, I guess you have to click twice to be able to talk. Anyway, I just want to reiterate what Bob Brown was talking about as far as having stormwater protection for some of the drainage areas here. You know, I really embrace that you're trying to daylight Jolly Giant Creek, but we need more of a holistic approach in that. Some of the material that's going down into the storm waters going back into Jolly Giant Creek, like 11th Street has just been paved, and a lot of the gravel or coarse sand has worked its way out of the new pavement and is in the curbing areas, which is getting washed down into the storm drain and going into Jolly Giant Creek. So I think we need to look at the maintenance of maybe more street sweeping, trying to keep the material out of Jolly Giant Creek. We're going through a lot of energy to try and daylight and open up for wildlife. But I think we also need to keep in mind that we need to maintain the material that is going down in the storm drains and repolluting the Jolly Giant Creek and Janes Creek areas. So if we could get that into the plan of that, we need a lot more street sweeping or some kind of maintenance program. I'm just not seeing that here in these areas. So I hear there is some street sweeping, but maybe keep it going, because there's just a lot of stuff going down into the storm drains. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Cindy. And Chris Richards has his hand raised. And I guess unmute yourself twice. We'll be able to hear you.
There we go. Okay, that should be working. Sorry about that. All these new formats always are different. Throw me for a twist. Just wanted to encourage the voice of the committee with, you know, anything that can be put into this gateway plan that will encourage, you know, opening up that Jolly Giant Creek and any other small version. There's a couple of other little guys there that are also lost, but I mean, once all this development happens, you know, in however long that takes, 3 years, 20 years, 50, whatever it is, I think, you know, whatever you can put in there to help protect that and keep it as an open waterway, and you know, with the bridge idea or encouraging landowners for whatever means to try to do that. I think that's really a great way to move forward with that. And you know, any language built into the general plan and gateway plan that encourages that, I think you know, what you have now is probably not adequate in my opinion, but I think adding to that language would certainly be a great thing for the future of Arcata. Anyway, that's all I got. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Any other public comment? I don't see any hands raised. So we'll move on to any other discussion from committee members. Anyone interested in making an action item, or are we satisfied with the city's collecting our comments so far?
I think we're probably good with the, you know, the direction that we're getting here, unless, you know, the committee feels, you know, like they want to make a recommendation. I think it's all made, you know, perfect sense. And I think those are, you know, certainly apart from the, you know, comment of daylighting additional areas of the creek, I think they all, you know, fit squarely within just clarifying and improving the, you know, communication value of the tool. And, you know, I'd love to see more creeks daylighted as well, you know, where we can, you know, possibly do that. So we'll look to strengthen that language as well.
Okay. Any further discussion before we move on to our next item? Seeing none.
Bob, I would like to reemphasize, I think it was you who initially brought it up, but there's scattered throughout here some policies that do address whatever you might want to call it, green infrastructure, low impact development, green streets. But if that could be more emphasized, maybe in some separate standalone policies to make that more of a priority. I see it, there's something that says, for example, the city shall encourage the use of green stormwater infrastructure strategies where feasible, but to make it more of a priority or giving precedence to those types of stormwater treatment. I think that would be great.
Okay. Elo has that so noted. And again, just reminder of our July, it's covered in our July comments. Okay, well, let's move on to our next item, which is new business item number 2, receive an update on the local coastal program and take action as appropriate. Welcome back, Jeremy.
All right. I don't know how late this committee typically goes, but I know you have a couple other items on the agenda, and I want to be mindful of all of your time. So I guess I will kind of give the high level orientation to what the, where we're at in the process, what's coming forward, and won't go into any of the content here. I'll leave to your, your discussion, your deliberations, any kind of commentary on the content. What I will say about the, the LCP, the local coastal program that we're, trying to go through the process of updating right now, in general, is that, we feel like we've gotten we've got a good draft that we're working with right here. There's a lot going on in the planning world right now in Arcata. And so, we have requirements for some of these other documents to get through them in a certain timeline. This one, we're, we realize may take a little bit longer. And so there's, you should consider this a very early introduction to this document. And so there's plenty of time for review. Okay, so having said that, I'll just note that, we've put into your packet the sea level rise section, and I've got that up on my screen. If you want to dig into detail, we can, but sea level rise section seemed like it would be most appropriate for this committee. There are also comments that happened at the last time we brought this document forward, and we addressed many of those concerns and comments. Some of those comments related to the glossary. So I've also got the glossary if you want to dig back into how we address those glossary issues. But right now we've got, we worked with the Coastal Commission staff, both our local staff and state sea level rise staff, to pull together the document that this excerpt was from. And we've done that over the last approximate 2 years. We've been working with them, several versions back and forth, I think we're on about version 4 right now. And it sounds like likely going into maybe one more, hopefully high level polishing version 5 before we submit for certification. And so right now we're really in the process of just, sharing this out with the community, getting feedback from committees as they see fit. And we've had a couple of planning commission business items, just again to share the document out, no decisions to be made. And then what we're hoping is that, sometime over the course of this year, we'll be able to pull together the final drafts, after we've gotten, feedback on these drafts, pull together the final drafts. And sometime, if in the ideal world, we'd be kind of in the same, early 2023, looking at, our local hearings for certification, and then submitting that in, say, late spring to the Coastal Commission for their review and certification, and hopefully have new and improved, updated local coastal program sometime late that year. I will say that this document is updating our coastal. This is the policy side. This is the local coastal element of the general plan, which was last updated in 1984. And the zoning document that we'll be bringing forward had a last comprehensive update in 95, but dates back to 1989. So, the documents that we're using right now for local coastal program, are fairly dated. They don't correspond well to existing land uses. They don't correspond well to existing zoning ordinances, or I would argue our thinking about planning at this point. And so it's pretty important that we update these, we think. And so, yeah, without going into the content, that's sort of where we're at procedurally. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. If you want to dig into the details on this document now, I'm happy to do that. If you want to table it, recognizing the other matter that you have on your agenda, we're always happy to come back again.
Thank you, David. Any committee member comments, overall comments? I guess I'm interested a little bit in the direction you've been getting from the Coastal Commission. So my overall comment, my original comment, I think it was 5 years ago on the first edition, is it seemed like someone took a lot of sea level rise policy language from a lot of different places and just kind of compiled them together, like the best of all worlds. But that was just the impression I got. And so there's a lot of policies, and I'm having hard trouble following them. There's 19 about both zone 1 and 2, and then you have a bunch of policies for just zone 1 and zone 2, and there seemed to be a lot of repetition, but maybe that's what the Coastal Commissions require. I love the overall strategy. It endorses adaptability and innovation and things, and then a lot of the policies seem severe and dry. You can't do this, you have to do this sort of a thing, and so I'm missing the connection between those policies. So anyway, and the way I looked at some of these policies was everything from putting a new signpost, a 4x4 post at the Arcata Marsh, which is considered development, to augmenting the levees on the oxidation ponds, to even thinking about sheet piling in zones 1 or 2 as an option for abating sea level rise, or pump stations, weirs. So I'm thinking about a full variety of development and how these policies might affect those things. Pumping may be something we look at for dealing with sea level rise, and yet there are policies in there about being energy efficient, and actually a pump would have to be a minimum at the 15-foot elevation or 3 feet above the sea level rise, which doesn't really work for pumps. Anyway, just that language, how do you apply this policy to an actual development? That was just kind of my overall concern on some of this language here. So I love the overall strategy.
Yeah, I think you raised some important concerns. The way that the draft was developed, our intent was to have the minimum number of policies necessary to implement the Coastal Act. That sort of was our starting point. We received, as I think I'd mentioned before, 3 iterations of complete draft review of most of this document. And, for the most part, where, Coastal was recommending that we, include policies that, even though we felt like they were maybe overburdensome or unnecessary, where they didn't conflict with sort of the core principles of the city managing and maintaining its uses and providing for the protection in the near term, implementing the sea level rise policy that that we've established through community outreach. We essentially said, okay, we're gonna accept those policies into the document. I would certainly be game for a discussion around how to reduce the number of policies, because I couldn't agree more. I feel like we have at this point way too many. And so if the committee wants to, work through, this section or any of the sections and help us, start to parse out, which policies really are not necessary, for our community in particular, we'd be happy to push back on that. I know we've received some comment from the public about, all of the transportation policies that, really support, vehicles as opposed to, alternative modes. And they want to see us, not emphasize vehicles so much. And literally every single one of those policies was a, recommendation that you're not going to get, not likely to get a certification if you don't have these in here. And so we took them. So yeah, be happy to have a much more, maybe a policy working group, subcommittee from this group that would be willing to work on those with us and go through and just push back on the ones that we don't feel like are necessary for our area.
Well, there's one idea. I think the other general comment is Coastal Commission has a conflict resolution where policies conflict with each other, and here you have things like about view shed versus improvements for sea level rise and such. And so and I think the introduction mentions that too. This is just one section by itself, but it also fits in with all the others. And so the idea of being able to have some of these specifics, but also be able to look at the different conflicts. Anyway, so that would be important to be in there somewhere. Otherwise, we'll be hung up by some of the language and standards. So.
Yeah, I can ask staff about that, and Vanessa, you may be able to weigh in on this a little bit better than I can. But my understanding is that the policy balancing at the Coastal Commission is really limited to just a few policy types where there's the ability to do that. So I don't know, Vanessa, maybe you can weigh in on that. That it's not that every policy can be balanced.
Yeah, I'm not really a permit analyst, or so I don't really know much about the balancing provisions of the Coastal Act. So I think the sea level rise folks and statewide planning would be the people to ask.
Okay, yeah, I'll check in with them and see if there are a couple of great improvements that we picked up on that will help facilitate better implementation of the Coastal Act, and also make it a little less onerous for folks that are doing smaller projects. So for instance, we included a waiver provision similar to the Coastal Commission's waiver provision, where if it's a de minimis project, you don't have to go through a full CDP process, and a couple of other changes that we think will streamline process overall. But I think with the comment that you've made, and I do want to make sure that I've got sort of a straw poll nod to do this. I'd be willing to go back through the document and try and go through and strike along policies that we think are redundant or repetitive or unnecessary, and bring that back to the committee.
Any other committee comments? Member comments? Well, seeing none, I don't know.
I think I'll note.
Okay,
yeah.
Did committee members get a chance to read it, or all the time was put on the gateway plan? There was a lot in our agenda to get through.
There was a lot, yeah. And again, we'd be happy to come back and walk through it again. As you read it, assuming that you're going to take the time in the future, because you didn't have time in the past. As you read it, I guess the one thing I'll note is that most of the policies around sea level rise, are really just they're just that. They're a statement of policy. They're a statement of local policy based on, the engagement that we've done to date. Any project to implement that policy would go before the Coastal Commission, State Coastal Commission, because all those projects would be in the retained jurisdiction. And so, it's kind of like we're taking a stand, but the hill we're standing on is very small, I guess is what I would say. But we are putting forward our intentions on how we believe the existential threat of sea level rise should be managed in our community.
Okay, and I agree. I mean, it's great to have a policy document that starts to address this. So I can see your hill getting smaller as the sea level rises. Okay.
There may be some public members who want to comment on it though as well.
Thank you. Okay. If we don't have any other committee members, then let's go to the public. Is there anybody in the public that wanted to comment on this document? Please raise your hand. Okay, well, seeing none, guess pleasure of the committee. This again was an action item, but again for discussion or continue it to our next meeting. We can talk about it without David or Dilo there too, but yeah, maybe we'll talk about how we can be of help to the city. So, okay. Nothing else on this item. Well, thank you, David and Dilo. Feel free to bow out.
Okay, thank you all. A great conversation about the Gateway Plan. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your service.
Okay, our next item is review and approve the 2021 annual report.
So I can jump in and provide some context if that's helpful. Annual report is an annual process, as in the name. Typically, staff prepares a draft, which has included in your agenda packet with the intent that committee members review that draft prior to the meeting. And if there are comments or edits on the annual report, we can wrap those in tonight's discussion. The annual report is slated to go to City Council on April 6th. I believe historically the chair has presented the annual report, so also wanting to see if Bob is willing and available on April 6th to present the annual report, and if not, then we can delegate another committee member tonight as well.
Okay, thank you. I did look at it. I was wondering, so the committee members are our current committee, and I was wondering, was Ray part of 2021? You may not know the answer, but it would be nice to also represent anybody in 2021 that's not.
I don't think Ray was on the committee in 2021. I will double check that, but I believe he resigned in 2020.
Okay, good. And the other thing I wanted to make note was the original form of the committee was the Arcata Marsh Task Force, which was formed in 1981. And so this would represent the 40th year of not the committee, but at least the involvement in wetlands and creeks. So, but
wow,
happy 40 years.
That's cool.
Thank
you.
Anyway, so, so as far as the, so any comments on inside before we talk about the presentation itself? We collect everything. I did notice a number of words that were missing a space between them. So it might need to go through space to spell check.
Thank you. That is so interesting. I don't see anything like with the red squiggly. I'm looking at the Word version. So thanks for catching that.
It might be the way the font is or printed out, but on page 2, at the very last line of the first paragraph that starts out wetlands and creek, it says Emily Benvey serves as.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
Well, there's 4 more on that page.
Weird. Yeah. Thanks for picking up on that. I rely on the red squigglies. They're
I
not
know.
showing up.
How can they not show up? That's
No.
not a word.
So weird. Thank you.
That was my only comment. Some of my memory is getting shorter, but it looked like it covered everything. Oh, did we mention, is our July meeting with, yes. Our July meeting with community development was listed on there, so. Any further discussion on our annual report? Looks good.
Looks good.
Yeah. So before we open up to the public, just a couple things is, so April 6th is right before I leave town to give a presentation. I can do April 6th, but I think I'll be like crunched to try and get everything done before leaving. So I would welcome anybody else who would like to do that. But some of the questions would be, is the meeting planned to be virtual or live?
The meetings have been very recently shifted to in-person for council and staff and community members, but it's run also as a hybrid for members of the public wanting to call in. So if necessary, I think we could do it virtually, though certainly it would be the preference of the council to have presenters in person.
And then I've always kept it real short. Like, here's the report, assuming that they've all read. And I've known that other committees actually go through every word of the report. And any feeling for how this council, if it's a full agenda, do they want to hear every detail from it? Or do we assume that they've read it and they just want to receive it and thank us for our hard work?
Recently, there has been a lot more council discussion on agenda items. And so I think that providing more upfront about the content of the annual report would be helpful. I do expect council members may have questions, some of them certainly being newer council members. So yeah, I would say that this year maybe takes a little bit of a different flavor and providing a more of a summary of the report itself as part of the presentation would be beneficial.
Last comment, was anybody interested in presenting on April 6th? I wouldn't mind at all. Was that a motion? Nominate someone else before you get nominated? No. So
I just know I'd mess it up, Bob.
you can't do that, but okay.
Let's do that, Bob.
And so this, I'm looking, so this is review and approve the 2021 annual report. So it is an action item. And if there's no discussion, we can go to the public and see if there's any public comments. And we have Moonlight raising her hand. Don't forget to unmute yourself twice. But you're probably used to this.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, great. Thank you. And happy 40th anniversary. I just wanted to touch on Bob's comment regarding, thank you for thinking of Ray. He did not serve, he had resigned prior to 2021. So that'll save Emily one extra little task and yay. And thanks again for tonight. Thanks for the great discussion, robust conversation about the Gateway Area Plan. This committee always rocks. And thank you again for your service.
Well, thank you, Moonlight.
Oh, Ray's just saying he didn't resign. He didn't renew his. He served his term. Okay,
He was fired.
Yeah. I'm sorry. What?
Nothing.
Yeah. Okay. I have been. Please amend that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. As always. All right. Any other public comments on this item?
Hi, Ray.
Hearing seeing no additional public comments, then a motion to approve the annual report.
I'll make a motion to approve the 2021 annual report for Wetlands and Creeks Committee.
And make Bob present on it.
And make Bob
Throw a guilt thing in there.
Poor Bob.
All right. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
All right. Any further discussion? Or pleading or anything? No. Okay. So a roll call vote. Is that what we need, Emily, on this?
Yes. Metz,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Svella,
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes, and thank you for your service, Bob.
Oh, sure.
You always do such a great job, Bob.
All right. Okay. Let's see. Our next item 4 is consider returning to in-person meetings and take action as appropriate. So the question is, how does this committee feel about it?
I have a quick question. When will the March Center reopen?
That's a good question.
It's open. Interpretive Center, yep. The AMIC is open. So if we were to resume to in-person meetings, they would take place at the Marsh Interpretive Center.
Well, I'm up for it. I'm vaccinated and ready to go.
Does anybody on the committee have, I don't know, are they immunocompromised? Have any kind of reason for not wanting to do this?
Not going back live, you mean?
I am, and so I need to be especially careful. So I could always call in via Zoom if you want to meet in person.
I don't think, just to put it out there, I don't expect committee meetings will be hybrid. So it would need to be an either or.
I see.
I have no problem accommodating that. Totally get that.
Agreed.
You know, I just defer to you, Vanessa.
When do we need to decide? It'd be nice to see what the current case counts are doing at that point.
There isn't a required drop dead date, so to speak. So we could have the next regularly scheduled meeting be virtual, and we could continue this agenda item as old business and just revisit each meeting. That's certainly an option.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, if we did it in person, I'm not opposed to wearing a mask in there if that would be, helps, alleviate your concern too. So I don't, I leave it up to everyone else for their own thing, but just
right
for what it's worth.
Yeah, well, thanks.
So we'll plan our next meeting, whether it's a special meeting in April or a regular meeting in May, to be virtual, and we'll have this on the agenda again, just to see how it goes. And I think we're all in agreement, Vanessa, that we just support your comfort level.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, my doctor said I have to be especially careful because if I get this, it will, I will probably have a severe outcome. So
we don't want that.
No, not at all. Okay. Do we have any public comments on this item? If you want to raise your hand. Seeing none, we can move on to item 7, committee member reports. Do any committee members have updates? Seeing none, we'll move on to staff reports.
Sure. So I will keep it pretty brief. Project updates are, we are still in the permit process for the Arcata Wastewater Treatment Facility Improvement Project. We are pushing very hard to begin construction in September of 2022. We have just our coastal development permit outstanding. So hopefully we'll have that in the next coming months and we'll be able to stay on construction schedule for that. We have submitted our 100% design for the boat launch project at the terminus of South I Street to our funders for review, with the hope of putting that out to bid at the end of March and constructing that this summer. So fingers crossed that we are able to stick to that timeline. I also recently met with some HSU professors who are professors of a senior engineering water quality monitoring class. And so they are going to be doing water quality monitoring in various parts of Janes Creek as part of their senior class. It's not a capstone project, but I think it's a lab. So I think there's like 6 different lab days and a final report associated with that. I did ask that they provide us their reports of their findings, and the next the May Wetlands and Creeks Committee meeting is after final exams. So I don't know if we'll have any student presentations, but I put it out there. If we have any interested students, that the committee would welcome a presentation of their findings. Some of the main areas that they're going to be doing water quality sampling at are Westwood Manor Park, Janes Creek Meadows Park, what we call the confluence, which is basically the Ridge Trail parking lot on West End Road, and then some ditch areas in the West End industrial area. I don't have the final constituent list, but we did talk about monitoring for pH, turbidity, fecal, dissolved oxygen. There might be 1 or 2 other parameters that they were able to monitor for that are escaping me. But sort of the main things that we would be interested in seeing as far as potential impacts to the creek and potential water quality indicators for potential support for salmonid species. Measure A recommendations were passed by the Parks and Rec Committee acting on behalf of the ad hoc committee. That was in February. They had a special meeting. I have it up right now. I'll share my screen to show the overall right here highlighted just to draw your attention. Overall projects across committees that were recommended for funding for the next fiscal year are right here in my highlights. The committee, Wetlands and Creeks Committee priorities that were recommended for funding are Janes Creek Fish and Water Quality Monitoring, as well as the invasive species inventory. And then lastly, not a project update, but a personnel update. We have submitted or received a signed offer letter for the new program manager. So we're hoping to bring them on in early April. So at your next committee meeting, I will be introducing them. And eventually we'll transition them into being the liaison, but I'm not sure what the timeline on that will be specifically.
They better be good.
We're very excited to have them on board, and I'm sure they'll do a really, really good job as liaison. So no doubts there.
Big shoes to fill.
We get to vote, take an action item on that.
Staff reports have no action items. I'm sorry to say.
Great. Well, thank you for the update. Any public comments on this topic? Raise your hand, please. Seeing none, we'll move on to future agenda items. So we talked both about the Jolly Giant Creek daylighting and the sea level rise policies. Any other agenda items we should include?
When do we need to revisit the list of priority projects for the ad hoc committee? What was the cycle on that, Emily?
I I want to say I don't have the schedule handy, but I think next fall is
Okay.
when the Wetlands and Creeks Committee would be providing a recommendation, though I feel like I recall this committee wanting to have 2 opportunities to potentially look at that list. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, so in the minutes from January, item number 2 said maintain presence on the committee and revisit priority funding list twice per year. So we
Thank
should
you.
probably maybe schedule those specifically. Our ad hoc committee has recommendations. So we have May, July, September, November. I think those are our regular.
I would very much defer to the committee, but assuming that November isn't too late in the process, and I can connect with the director on that, I think September and November would be better because they are after the next fiscal year starts, like significantly after, right? So if we were to revisit this again in May, it would be before our next fiscal year starts, which the current recommendations are speaking to. So there wouldn't really be any new information per se based on the performance of the project. So I feel like the later those items are visited, the more data we have for the current fiscal year that could potentially inform the next fiscal year.
Okay.
But I will double check that November schedule aligns with sort of when the ad hoc committee would potentially meet next year, just to make sure we don't miss the boat on that. But I think it should be fine.
Okay, make it so number 1. Star Trek quote, for those who may not recognize it. Okay. Any other agenda items? Okay, hearing none, and again, I think Emily sneaked out the comment that she's overwhelmed with stuff trying to catch up in her new position, so we should be easy on her. And her next meeting is May 17th. Okay, motion to adjourn. Chris isn't here, so we can't
Motion
leave.
to adjourn tonight's Wetlands and Creeks Committee meeting.
A second on that?
I'll second.
Wes, and do we need a roll call on this one? No, we consider ourselves adjourned. All right, see you guys later.
All right.
Everybody.